Hey there, everyone. This is Gregg Schutze for ReadyForTheDraft.com, and this is the Ready for the Draft podcast, episode 11 of the podcast series dedicated to the 2020 NFL Draft. Hard to believe we're already through week 8 of the college football season. Halloween is knocking on our door, which means next week we're going to be talking about November. That's usually where teams separate themselves, the championship teams. We're going to start seeing some of the college football playoff rankings coming out pretty soon. And before you know it, we'll be talking about bowl season. Hard to believe. Now, 2 weeks ago, we took a look at the quarterbacks, and obviously Tua Tagovailoa and Justin Herbert separated themselves. Joe Burrow, though hot on their heels. I think the three of them, I think Tua has a really good chance of being the number one overall pick, likely going to Miami, although Cincinnati, could potentially make a run there as well. Zach Taylor looking for his quarterback of the future. Justin Herbert, the big body, big arm, athletic quarterback out of Oregon, looks a lot like Josh Allen. He's going to be right there, probably a top 10 pick. And then Joe Burrow. I'd argue that Joe Burrow is a top 10 talent. Why? This is a guy who a season ago look like an average quarterback, maybe an undrafted free agent, maybe a late round pick at best. But Joe Brady comes in, brings an NFL style offense, and Joe Burrow has shown such a command of that offense. I can picture him in an NFL offense tomorrow based on the scheme that he's been running. Now, Tua went down to an ankle injury. He's not going to be playing this week against Arkansas. I don't think that's really going to affect his draft stock, although he's had the same surgery on both ankles now for high ankle sprains. So that is something just to keep an eye on. Durability may be the biggest concern when you're talking about Tua. Quarterbacks after that, Jake Fromm, where's he going to go? Is he a first rounder? Is he a second rounder? He does a lot of things at the line of scrimmage that a lot of quarterbacks, are still struggling to be able to figure out. Then obviously you've got the underclassmen, Jacob Eason, Sam Ehlinger, KJ Costello, and Jordan Love. What are they going to do? Are they going to enter the draft? Are they going to come back for their senior season? It remains to be seen there. Last week, talked about the receiver position. Talked about the fact that Jerry Jeudy right now is the number one wideout, but C.D. Lamb, or as Gus Johnson calls him, C.D. with the TD. C.D. Lamb is right on his heels. And I talked about his performance against Texas really looking like Julio Jones. He was doing some Julio Jones type things out there. Now, don't get me wrong. He's not Julio Jones. I know Julio's 6'3", 220, and CeeDee Lamb's only 6'2", $197. But the strength and the power, along with the athleticism, the speed, and the hands, really reminded me a lot of what Julio Jones looked like at Alabama. So Jeudy and CeeDee Lamb both top 10 picks in my opinion. And then Henry Ruggs looking like a top 20, top 25 pick as well. You've got T. Higgins, Laviska Shenault having a chance there. And I'll give you a name that we didn't talk about last week, but he's a junior and a guy who had a great week this week. We'll be talking about, or this past week, we're going to talk about him as we talk about what I've seen, and that's KJ Hamler out of Penn State. He's a little guy, 5'9", 176, showing that he can stretch defenses on the outside. I think he'd be a wicked slot receiver. Had a really nice slot fade in the game against Michigan, the 28-21 win in Happy Valley, the whiteout against the Wolverines. KJ Hamler's a guy to really keep an eye on. A guy who's going to continue to move up draft boards, in my opinion, if he decides to stay at Penn State. Then you're looking at a receiver who's going to be talked about much like Henry Ruggs this year in the 2021 draft. So today we're going to talk about the running back position. Now, I know when you talk about running backs, everyone talks about the fact that, man, the game is moving away from the running back. The running back is a dying breed. Who really cares about the running back? And for a while, I think that might have been the case. There was a stretch there where, hey, the running back has been devalued. But let's take a look at who's successful right now. You've got Carolina is winning games. They're over 500. Despite the fact that Cam Newton is down, and while Kyle Allen has filled in admirably in his stead, you look at Christian McCaffrey and the special back that he is, a guy who, is running with power between the tackles like we never thought that he could, the speed on the outside, the elusiveness in the open field, and then obviously the dynamic, playmaking ability with his hands. You think about the Rams with Todd Gurley. What does Todd Gurley mean to Jared Goff? Well, when Todd Gurley's in the game, Jared Goff, much different quarterback because you have that threat of the run. He's able to use the play action, and really, Todd Gurley sets up that passing attack for the Rams. When he goes out, they're a much different team offensively. How about the 49ers? 49ers are undefeated. And Jimmy G's played okay, and he's got some receivers. They just made a trade for Emmanuel Sanders, but you look at, Dante Pettis, Deebo Samuel. Really the number one wideout for them is the tight end George Kittle, having another monster year for the Niners. But that running game, Matt Breida, Tevin Coleman, just really running the football very well, and they're doing it behind a line that is without Joe Staley, without Mike McGlinchey for much of the season. How about the Saints? Saints have Alvin Kamara, and his versatility, his ability to catch the football out of the backfield as well as carry the football. Obviously, Ezekiel Elliott, he's a difference maker there for Dallas. That offense is a lot different when he's got the football in his hands. You're running behind that offensive line. Dak Prescott, a much different quarterback when Ezekiel Elliott's in the game versus when he's not. We've already seen that. So the running backs, and then not just the starters, right? Not just the starters. You've got Austin Ekeler behind Melvin Gordon and the impact that he made, especially when Melvin Gordon was holding out. Tarik Cohen. Look at the Patriots. They've got like 3 or 4 different running backs, all effective, and you really don't know if you're a fantasy owner of any of the Patriots running backs, you kind of get a little frustrated because you don't know who to start. You got Sony Michel, who's really kind of the workhorse for them, but James White coming out of the backfield, catching the football, Rex Burkhead, Brandon Bolden, they all contribute. So what I'm trying to say is that running back position, for as much as everyone talks about it being devalued, it still makes a difference at the next level. So the running back position, when you're drafting, if you can draft a franchise running back or find a diamond in the rough, it makes all the difference in the world. Now, what's interesting is if you look at over the years, all the way back in 2011, 29 running backs were taken in the draft. I mean, it's staggering. That was the year that Mark Ingram went in the first round. He was the only running back taken in round number 1, but in the on day 2, rounds 2 and 3, you had another 8 running backs taken at that point. So it's one of those things. It's kind of interesting to see how the running back position evolves. 26 running backs taken in 2013. 2014 you had 22. 2015, another 22. And in 2015, that was the draft that saw Todd Gurley and Melvin Gordon go in round number 1. That was really when teams were talking about, do we take a running back? Does it really even matter? Well, that draft also saw, TJ Yeldon, who was a serviceable back, taken in round number 2. Tevin Coleman taken in round number 3, the 9th overall pick in round number 3. Duke Johnson going to the Browns. David Johnson, one of the top 5 backs in the league right now. He was taken 86 overall in the 3rd round. So that was a draft that definitely had some impact players at the running back position. And if you take a look, 2016, another 23 running backs taken. That's the year that Ezekiel Elliott went in the 1st round. Derrick Henry went in round number 2. So Jordan Howard was a steal in round number 5. Moving forward, 2017, 30 running backs. 30. So you're talking about a running back position that's devalued, yet you drafted 30 running backs, when you're talking about the league. Leonard Fournette, Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Joe Mixon, Alvin Kamara, Kareem Hunt, James Conner taken in the 3rd round, Tarik Cohen in round number 4, Jamal Williams of the Packers. I mean, look at the Packers, Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams, the way that they're running the football. Aaron Jones was taken in round number 5. That's a day 3 pick, really balling out, as is Marlon Mack. He was taken in round number 4. Wayne Gallman for the Giants getting some playing time, round number 4 as well. So the running back position it means something. Don't let anybody fool you there. And then obviously 2018, when Saquon Barkley went number 2 overall, 21 running backs taken in that draft. Sony Michel taken at the end of round number 1. Nick Chubb at the top of round number 2. Kerryon Johnson also taken, making a difference there for the Lions. And then some of the other serviceable backs, kind of the backups, the guy change of pace backs, the likes of Nyheim Hines, Royce Freeman. Those were days 2 and 3 picks. You look at Chase Edmonds for the Cardinals. He had a big game for the Redbirds this past weekend, filling in for David Johnson. Ito Smith of the Falcons, he was taken in the 4th round. So my point is the running back position means something. And, you're looking at, there are probably, a handful of guys who truly are elite players, but you have teams that focus on the run a lot more than maybe even in years past. And, it's one of those things. Yes, the game is, they're throwing the football a lot, but if you want to win football games, you have to be able to put the ball on the ground and carry the football. Don't put the ball on the ground, but carry the football, sustain, drives, time of possession. If you're playing the Chiefs, you don't want to give Patrick Mahomes any time. This is a fast-moving offense. The best defense is a good offense, especially against the Chiefs, where they can score, in 10, 15 seconds if you really let them. So running backs absolutely make a difference. So I've got some guys here, my top 10, plus a few other guys to mention at the top of this draft. So without further ado, my number 1 running back, it hasn't changed. Come on. It's Jonathan Taylor out of Wisconsin, 5'11", 219-pound junior, has just been a beast ever since he showed up on campus at Wisconsin. And Wisconsin has a history of those running backs, and with that running game that they have, all the way back, with Ron Dane to Monty Ball to Melvin Gordon. And Jonathan Taylor has a chance to be just as special, if not more special, than those guys. When you talk about him, 2017, he was a Doak Walker finalist. But when you think about it, his second game on campus against Florida Atlantic, taking on the Owls, 26 carries, 223 yards, and 3 touchdowns. That's 8.6 yards per carry. And that was as a freshman. As a freshman, 10 games with over 100 yards, 3 of those over 200 yards, a touchdown in 7 straight games, with 3 multi-touchdown games as well. I mean, it was just staggering. Finished with, 1,977 yards on the ground, 13 touchdowns, just an absolute beast. 2018 follows that up with, winning the Doak Walker Award, another 10 games with 100-plus yards, including, 2 games over 200 yards. Just an absolute beast. So when you look at him, 2018, over 2,000 yards, 2,194 yards, 16 touchdowns on the year, and through 7 games this year, already eclipsing, the 900-yard mark, 15 touchdowns on the year as well, 100 yards in 6 of the 7 games. The only other game was an 80-yard rush. 80-yard game against Michigan State where he scored 2 touchdowns, has at least 1 touchdown in every game this year, 5 multi-touchdown games, including 4 against Kent State, 4 games with 3 receptions. Now that's the thing. In his first 2 seasons, he had 8 receptions in each of those seasons. In 2019, he's already hit that total. 16 receptions through 7 games. He's definitely worked on his hands, and you can see that when you evaluate him. I think he's improving in the passing game, shows better hands. He's still working on, securing the football before turning upfield. Had a drop against Illinois, really hit him in the hands. And the thing with it was he was looking upfield, looking for the linebacker, trying to make a play down the field before he actually secured the football. So still a learning progress, still, a work in progress there. The other thing is I don't really know, about his pass blocking skills as much, because when you have passing downs, when Wisconsin's going to be throwing the football, if you'll watch them play, it's usually Garrett Groshek, the backup running back, who's in there as the pass blocker. I want to really see, Jonathan Taylor back there. Is he going to be able? Because there are some other guys in here. We'll talk about Kylan Hill, and what he did against LSU to put a block on Grant Delpit. I don't know if Jonathan Taylor can really pass block, and that's something that I'm really wanting to see more of. But there's no doubt Jonathan Taylor, the speed is just electric. This is a guy who ran a 10-4 100 meters, ran in the 4x1 for Wisconsin. So he has the breakaway speed, has more speed to him than any of the other Wisconsin running backs. And I think that's what makes him so dangerous. You can list off, Dane and Ball and Gordon, but nobody has that explosive. All of those guys run hard, the power between the tackles, and Jonathan Taylor absolutely does that. But what's so staggering is he had 4,171 yards. It's the most through his sophomore year. I mean, that beat Ron Dane's 3,566 yards and Herschel Walker's 3,507. The only other two guys over 3,500 yards in their career. And he's just the fourth player in FBS history with back-to-back 1,900-yard seasons. Incredible. Yeah, and this is a guy, I mentioned the speed. He's going to run by you. All he needs is a crease, and you get him into the open field, and he can put his foot in the ground. He's got a little bit of wiggle to him as well when you get him in space. But I think really what's special about him is the vision. The vision to see the holes, see the cutback lanes. A season ago, he had NFL offensive linemen. He had the likes of Michael Dieter and David Edwards and Bo Benshaw. They're gone. And so he's running behind a line. Cole Van Lanen is kind of a part-time starter a season ago at left tackle. Obviously, Tyler Biadasz, who's likely going to be the Remington Award winner this year. You look at him, he's kind of the anchor there, but you've got three new starters up front, and they like to rotate a lot of other guys in there. Jonathan Taylor, still the vision, even against a line that has been, questionable at times, is seeing those lanes. All he needs is a crease, puts his foot in the ground, gets north and south, no wasted movement. You're not going to see him dancing. What I do appreciate is ability to make guys miss in the backfield with a quick lateral cut. And a guy that big, he's 5'11", 220 pounds, and making guys miss in the backfield is quite impressive. But, 28 games over 100 yards, 8 games over 200, and 1 300-yard game. And that was in 2018, 33 carries, 321 yards, 3 touchdowns against Purdue. But Jonathan Taylor, to me, you look at him, and Melvin Gordon, obviously he was a top 20 pick. I'm looking at Jonathan Taylor. He has the ability, I wouldn't put him quite in the Saquon Barkley category, because Saquon could do a little bit of everything. And there are still some holes in Jonathan Taylor's game. Really, he has to prove that he can pass block, that he's more improved as a pass catcher. And I think Saquon Barkley was a little bit more refined. That's why he's going at number 2 overall. I still think Jonathan Taylor can end up in the top 15. He just needs to go to the right team. And you very well could have a guy. He's just continuing to develop. You look at Melvin Gordon, and Melvin Gordon, when he came out of Wisconsin, he was not known as a pass catcher. And that was one of the things that he had to kind of prove to everyone, that he could catch the football out of the backfield. Now, Melvin Gordon, in his career, just 22 receptions. So, Jonathan Taylor has already surpassed that amount. But when you talk about Melvin Gordon with the Chargers, I'm pulling up the stats now to just kind of take a look at what Melvin Gordon has done. Let's see. Receiving 2016 through 2018 had at least 21 receptions. Let's see. I'm sorry. Even more than that. Okay. So I was looking at the wrong number. So in 2015, 33 receptions, 41 in 2016, 58 in 2017, and 50 in 2018. So when you look at guys and catching the football out of the backfield, Melvin Gordon, just 22, including just 19 in 2014. I'm not too worried about Jonathan Taylor. As long as he continues to work and continues to develop his hands, I'm not too worried about that. Again, you look at Melvin Gordon, what he was able to do since he's been a Charger, catching the football out of the backfield. I think Jonathan Taylor absolutely worthy of a first-round pick in the top half of round number 1. Now, another guy who I think was at the top of a lot of people's lists as the number one wideout in this, or I'm sorry, number one running back in this class because he was the best receiver, is DeAndre Swift. 5'9", 215-pound junior. This is a guy who doesn't have a ton of wear on his legs, just 354 carries in his career as he played behind the likes of Nick Chubb and Elijah Holyfield. Now, Jonathan Taylor, on the flip side, 763 carries through 3 seasons, well, really 2.5 there for Wisconsin. Now, DeAndre Swift in 2018, over 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns. That's 6.4 yards per carry, 32 receptions as well, 297 yards and 3 touchdowns. Through 7 games this year, 752 yards on the ground, 6.8 yards per carry, and 7 touchdowns to go along with 13 receptions. He's got 62 receptions in his career. Looks like a much more polished receiver at this point. What I appreciate on a wheel route, the ability to track the football over his shoulder and really be a hands catcher. You don't want to let the ball get into your body, especially as a running back. If you're not used to catching the football, you want to be able to catch the football with your hands and not let it get into the body where the defender can make a play. Now in 2017, it's crazy. He had just one game with 10 carries. But by 2018, had 100 yards in 4 of the last 5 games. 8 multi-reception games. 3 games with 4 receptions. Had 6 versus Bama, and then 5 versus Texas in the bowl game, which really kind of springboarded himself into this season. That's really where everyone was looking at him as the guy when you're talking about the running backs. Because, man, DeAndre Swift, he's catching all these footballs, 11 in his final 2 games of the 2018 college football season. 2019, he's got 5 games, with 10 plus carries, and 3 games over 100 yards, and including the last 2 games, 113 yards against South Carolina, 179 yards against Kentucky. So I think that's one of the things that is quite impressive, with DeAndre Swift, is he's sharing the backfield even this year. He's got, Zamir White, he's got Brian Herrien, James Cook in the backfield with him, and he's still able to get the job done in his career. Over 2,000 yards, over 2,400 yards, 20 touchdowns, 6.8 yards per carry. And DeAndre Swift, like I said, more of a polished receiver, more polished route runner at this point. He has a chance. You look at Sony Michel, another guy there at Georgia. I mentioned Nick Chubb, forgot Sony Michel. But you see Sony Michel down at the end of round number 1. I think DeAndre Swift has a chance to be a late first-round pick. Now, if DeAndre Swift is a late first-round pick, what about Travis Etienne? The 5'10", 215-pound junior out of Clemson, 1,100-yard games to his credit at this point, including 2 200-yard seasons. He came to Clemson and had 2 100-yard games with only 2 games with 10-plus carries, which I thought was interesting. Finished with a touchdown in 4 of the last 5 games of his freshman season, which springboarded him into 2018. Over 1,600 yards on the ground, 8.1 yards per carry, 24 touchdowns. Led to being 7th in the Heisman voting. He had 800-yard games in that game, which I thought was just staggering, and only 2 games without a touchdown. Etienne, I think what you really saw with him was the explosiveness, his ability to take the top, really go the distance on any given play. That was one of the things that I think really stood out, was his ability to just, he had the speed to get to the outside, and he's going to outrun you. But the question was really, did he have any power? And that's one of the things that I've seen this year, watching and studying Travis Etienne, is he has that ability now, after he puts his foot in the ground, gets north and south, that he's able to run through arm tackles. He's running through contact. The balance is better. And he's not just known as a speed back anymore. And so I think that's really important for his draft stock, because he's not just a change of pace back. He can, shoulder the load, even though he's getting a little bit of help in the backfield from Lynjay Dixon this year. Through 7 games, 781 yards on the ground, 8 yards per carry, 6 touchdowns. 3 games over 100 yards, including 205 yards against Georgia Tech. 2 games with 4 receptions as well. He's a guy, 32 receptions in his career. Just about half of those have come this past season. So a lot of these guys, these running backs, they don't get a ton of time out on the field the first couple of years. So they're really making the most of being more of a pass catcher, evolving as a running back as they go. And I think for Etienne, he's continuing to develop. And for me, he's not the polished guy. When you look at, when we talk about these running backs and who's going to be taken in round number 1, the polish, and Sony Michel and Saquon Barkley in 2018. Rashad Penny, kind of a surprise, kind of that outlier a little bit. Josh Jacobs, and his ability, to catch the football as well as, run with power and speed. Leonard Fournette, Christian McCaffrey, some of these guys just really just polished running backs. Ezekiel Elliott, Todd Gurley, and Melvin Gordon. When you think of running backs coming out, those were names that absolutely popped out to you and said, you know what, these are guys that are polished running backs, that are going to be guys who can make it at the next level, not only make it, but really make an impact early on in their career. And I think, for Travis Etienne, still developing in a couple of areas. Jonathan Taylor, for me, I think he's more of the Melvin Gordon type to me, from the standpoint of he does everything so well with running the football that pass catching is going to come. I think with Travis Etienne, really wanting to see him evolve as a runner so that he's not just a one-trick pony. Put your foot in the ground, get north and south, show a little bit of a wiggle in the open field to make guys miss, and then, really run by everybody and score. You've got to be able to break tackles. You've got to be able to be elusive. And Travis Etienne really showing that he can do everything, and that's going to bode well for him with his draft stock. Could he end up being a first-round pick? Sure. I mean, the top 4 running backs in this draft class could very well end up being first-round picks. But I think what's going to end up happening is you're probably going to have 2, maybe 3 running backs taken in round number 1. If you're wondering, in terms of first-round picks, when did we have, when you're talking about first-rounders, we had just 1 last year, 3 in 2018, 3 in 2017. Let's see, we had 3 in 2012. That was when Trent Richardson, Doug Martin, and David Wilson were taken in round number 1. But you have to kind of scan through things. 2009, we had 3 running backs taken in the first round. So you had to really go back to 2008. Darren McFadden, Jonathan Stewart, Felix Jones, Rashard Mendenhall, and Chris Johnson, all going in round number 1 in 2008. So we had to go back, quite a long time to find a draft where we had at least 4 running backs taken in the draft. So I think when you're talking about Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift, look to be the most polished, but Travis Etienne and the next guy I'm going to talk about, J.K. Dobbins out of Ohio State, are definitely 2 guys that are on the rise. And I wouldn't be surprised if these guys sneak into the end of the first round, just based on the fact that you look at what these guys are doing at the next level. Nick Chubb was the guy who I thought could sneak into round number 1, was at the top of round 2, and he's shown that he can be the guy there in Cleveland. So when you're talking about that J.K. Dobbins, hey, if you don't get drafted in round number 1, hopefully you get drafted early on day 2, just like Nick Chubb did. And I think because of Nick Chubb's success, there could be a team who could trade up and get J.K. Dobbins there at the end of round number 1. Now, J.K. Dobbins, 5'10", 217-pound junior, shared the backfield with Mike Weber his first 2 seasons, really burst onto the scene as a freshman. His first game against Syracuse, 29 carries, over 180 yards, really just kind of emerged as the guy. He took over the starting job from Mike Weber, 6 games with over 100 yards, 6 games with multi-receptions as well, over 1,400 yards on the ground, 22 receptions as well. In 2018, went over 1,000 yards again, only 4.6 yards per carry, 10 touchdowns, 26 receptions. Things kind of slowed down, a little bit from their running game. Dwayne Haskins had to really take over that offense down the stretch because of the ineffectiveness for them running the football. I mean, you can see that the drop off there, 4.6 yards per carry. Back in here in 2019 through 7 games, 7.1 yards per carry. That's 947 yards on the ground, 7 touchdowns to go along with 10 receptions, 58 receptions in his career, over 3,400 yards, 24 touchdowns. He's going to be the first Ohio State Buckeye to rush for 1,000 yards in 3 straight seasons since Archie Griffin, 2-time Heisman Award winner Archie Griffin. In 2018, he still had managed 3 games of 100 yards, 2 games with over 20 carries, 1 game with 30 carries, 8 games with multi-receptions. 2019, 5 games over 100 yards and a touchdown in all but 1 game so far this year. To me, J.K. Dobbins is just he's running with more purpose. I think that's one of the things that really is evident. You see the vision, his cutback ability. He sees the lanes. He runs physically between the tackles. He's a guy who's going to run through contact, excellent balance, and then the hands. He's another polished receiver. 58 receptions in his career. When you look at that, he and DeAndre Swift, obviously the more polished pass catchers in this crop of running backs, but. I think, with the way Ohio State's offense is playing, with Justin Fields really able to throw the ball at will, it's creating a lot of opportunities for J.K. Dobbins. Really the question is Justin Fields in that passing attack opening up the running game, or is it really J.K. Dobbins that's opening up all these throwing lanes for the Buckeyes? It may very well end up being the latter. So those are the top 4. And I know Oklahoma State, Cowboy fans are going to be pounding the table. They want me to be talking about Chuba Hubbard, the 6'1", 207-pound redshirt sophomore. Why is he not in there? Why is he not up higher? He's having a phenomenal year, and absolutely, yes, he is. You look at Chuba Hubbard, his redshirt freshman year, I think I got frustrated. If you listen to my podcast last year, you'll know, where's Justice Hill? Why isn't he carrying the ball? I said one of 2 things. Either Justice Hill is hurt or in the doghouse, or Chuba Hubbard is that good. And I think it's really was the latter. That's proving to be true. In 2018, 6 yards per carry, 740 yards and 7 touchdowns to go along with 22 receptions. So that was one of the things that you really saw kind of jumping off the game. 100 yards in 3 of the last 4 games, 13 receptions during that time as well. 2019 just really shot out of a cannon. He's already at 1,265 yards and 15 touchdowns. Just 6 receptions though coming out of the backfield. But in 2019 through 7 games, let's see, 20 plus carries in most of his games. 30 plus carries in 4 games, which is staggering. 6 100 yard rushing games. I'll get that right. 6 100-yard rushing games. There we go. 3 games that actually went over 200 yards and a touchdown in every game, 5 of which had multi-touchdown games, multi-receptions in 5 of the 7 games, even though he only has 6 receptions. Wait a minute. That can't be right. Multi-receptions in 5 of the 7 games, but he has 6 receptions. Well, in any event, he's already over 2,000 yards in his career in just 2 seasons, and we're not even through the entire 2019 season. So yes, he is absolutely dynamic. He has tremendous speed. I think more speed than you were expecting from this guy. He runs with some power, but I would like to see him run with a little bit more power. I think he goes down a little too easily at times, but definitely has a lower body strength to carry the pile. So it makes me wonder if maybe that's just a balance thing more than anything else. But I think Chuba Hubbard, at one point, he was leading the league, or leading the FBS in rushing, and Tylan Wallace was leading the country in receiving. Oklahoma State, their offense always on fire. And for me, when I watch Chuba Hubbard play, his play just it jumps off the tape. He's just a guy who always seems to make the right decision. He makes the right reads. I'm going to go ahead and make this cutback, and usually goes for a big gainer. I'm flipping through my notebook here to take a look at the game against Baylor. Vision to see cutback lanes, leg drive for extra yards to finish, burst through the hole. Steps out of a tackle, and then down the sideline, runs through 2 more tackles to finish. A 3-yard touchdown, run play to the short side, had the speed to get to the edge, to get to the front pylon, lowers his pads to run over Blake Lynch, the linebacker on the edge, speed to the edge. So you can see, as I'm reading these notes, he's a guy who likes to get to the edge, doesn't run the ball between the tackles quite as much, but he's so effective on the perimeter. That's one of the things you do want to see at the next level is he going to be a guy who's going to be just as effective between the tackles? Because look, if you get out there on the perimeter, everybody's going to be running fast. And that's one of the things Kyler Murray said was, hey, all the holes are there, but by the time I get there, those holes have already closed up at the next level. Those were holes that I was running through in college, and they're just not there anymore. Chuba Hubbard would end up learning that the hard way. I want to see him run the ball between the tackles a little bit more. Is he going to come out? That's going to be the big question. I think Spencer Sanders, the quarterback, the way that he's played, I think Chuba Hubbard may come back. Let's make a run at OU and Texas in Big 12 play with a dynamic quarterback like that. Be interesting to see what happens. I think especially with these 4 running backs at the top, he's going to have to try to separate himself and maybe behoove him to come back for one more year. Now, outside of those top 5, there are going to be a lot of running backs that are going to be pushing for the top spot. Eno Benjamin, the junior out of Arizona State, 5'10", 201 pounds. This is a guy who really had a breakout 2018 season, really made everyone take notice of what he was doing out there on the field. Third-team All-American in 2018, first-team All-Pac-12, the first ASU running back in the top 10 in rushing yards. 9 100-yard running games, including 312 yards, 3 touchdowns against Oregon State. Over 100 yards in 5 of his last 3 games. Only 3 games without multiple receptions as well. So it was an impressive performance in 2018. Through 7 games this year, 140 carries, 633 yards. That's only 4.5 yards per carry, which is down a full yard per carry from a season ago. 7 touchdowns, but he does have 19 receptions. Had 35 all of last season, so he's already more than halfway to that total. 463 carries in 3 seasons. Over 2,400 yards, 12 touchdowns in his career, 59 receptions. When you talk about that 2018 season, we mentioned the 300 yards against Oregon State. 2019, as a comparison, 100 yards in 4 of the 7 games. In 2018, 9 games with over 100 yards. So, he's really going to have to pick things up if he wants to equal those numbers. And it'll be interesting to see, does Eno Benjamin come out, or does he stay for one more year? He's kind of the leader of that offense that's, that Herman Edwards has running there for the Sun Devils in Tempe. Herman Edwards has got something going there for the Sun Devils. They, in just his second year, had him ranked at one point. And Eno Benjamin really hasn't been as much of a factor as you'd like to see him. The thing with Eno Benjamin for me, whenever I watch him play, is the balance. I think that's one of the things that just jumps off the film. His ability to, really, it's a patented spin move. Through contact. He spins out of contact left and right. And, Pro Football Focus a season ago, 94 missed tackles, which was 3rd in the FBS, to go along with 31 explosive runs, which was 5th among running backs, according to Pro Football Focus. And 81 first downs, which was 3rd in the FBS. Thank you, Pro Football Focus, for those numbers. So, he's one of those guys who's just always, he's so slippery. the spin moves, and the thing with it is there's no real wasted movement with that either. He's able to sink his hips, get into that spin move, and just, it's hard to tackle that spinning target. That's a moving target going away from you often. And so if you're trying to wrap up in one spot and he's spinning and going to a different spot, you're likely going to end up grabbing a leg that he's able to then pull out of there and then get back upfield. The thing with Eno too is that he has that burst, so that once he's out of contact, he's going to be, or out of that tackle, he's going to be able to make plays down the football field. I just would like to see a little bit more consistency out of him. This season. Eno Benjamin, he could very well end up being a back that decides to enter this draft, but I also wouldn't be surprised to see him come back for one more year, especially getting to play with that freshman quarterback there in Tempe with ASU. Sticking to the Pac-12, how about Zach Moss? 5'11", 222 pounds. The senior is one of the more dynamic running backs in this year's draft class. Why am I not mentioning him higher, you may ask? Well, the reason really is durability. This is a guy who just can't seem to really stay healthy. I think that's the most frustrating thing more than anything else, because when you look at what he's been able to do, over 1,100 yards in 2017, 10 touchdowns to go along with 29 receptions. 2018, just played in 9 games, and still over 1,000 yards, 11 touchdowns on the year. He's played in 6 games this year, got hurt against USC, a shoulder injury, 613 yards and 8 touchdowns. I believe at one point he was leading the FBS in broken tackles, and a guy that did that a season ago was David Montgomery. David Montgomery was always breaking tackles, the lateral agility to make people miss. Zach Moss is a guy who's just going to run through you. 222 pounds. He's so powerfully built, big, thick legs, and just able to run through contact, lower the pad level, and he's going to punish you, whenever he can. So he makes, that makes him really fun to watch. As he's getting through things. 570 carries in his career, over 3,200 yards. One of the top, I think he's the number 2 rusher. Maybe he's actually the leading rusher now in Utah history. I think he's finally hit that mark. 31 touchdowns in his career, 43 receptions. If he can stay healthy, and that's a big if right now, but if he can stay healthy, I think Zach Moss could end up being a guy. He'll probably be a late day 2, possibly even an early day 3, depending on his medical. If the medical clears, he should be an early day 2 pick. It's just based on the talent alone. But my thing is, and I said it last week when I was talking about Laviska Shenault, I don't care how good you are, how dynamic you are. If you can't get out onto the football field because of injury, you're not going to be very effective. You're not going to be all that effective for a team who's going to be drafting you high. So with Zach Moss, he's going to have to show that he can be, he can stay healthy. And if he can do that, because his game's really built on contact, being physical. And if he can show that he can stay healthy, then I think Zach Moss is going to move up draft boards. But I really worry that, that's going to really hinder him moving up draft boards for some teams. Now, Cam Akers out of Florida State, 5'11", 212-pound junior. As a freshman, absolute beast. Over 1,000 yards, 5.3 yards per carry, and 7 touchdowns to go along with 16 receptions. In 2018, though, and this was Willie Taggart's first year, saw a little bit of a regression in his game. 706 yards on the ground, 4.4 yards per carry, and 6 touchdowns. Did have 23 receptions, so saw an uptick there. But what I really was seeing out of Cam Akers was, the vision was gone. He'd have a cutback lane back to the inside, especially because he'd have a defensive back with outside leverage, and instead of making that cutback lane through a hole, and a hole was sitting right there, he'd still try to beat that defensive back one-on-one to the outside, and ultimately would get wrapped up for little to no gain. This year, much more explosive back. The explosion is back. With Cam Akers, through 7 games, over 700 yards, 773 to be exact, up to 5 yards per carry, 8 touchdowns, 19 receptions as well. So this is the guy who let's see, he's got 58, right? Yeah, 58 receptions in his career to this point. And when you're looking at the 9 games over 100 yards, including 4 of the 7 this year. So he's a back who has the talent to be special, to be a guy who can ultimately be a workhorse and be a number one for a team. But you're waiting for him to really have that breakout game since that freshman year. That freshman year, he broke Dalvin Cook's freshman rushing record at Florida State. 1,025 yards on just 194 carries. He's somebody who I think definitely can continue to improve his draft stock throughout the rest of the season. Florida State may not be playing all that well, but if he shows the effort, much like Brian Burns did a season ago, Brian Burns, this was a team that was struggling, that really wasn't going anywhere. Yet Brian Burns, with his effort, he was a guy who was playing at a high level. And the NFL rewarded him with a first-round pick because he was so dynamic, because he's a guy, you're playing to your potential on a bad team. NFL franchises are still going to recognize that. Now, Keyshawn Vaughn out of Vanderbilt is one of the more dynamic running backs in this year's draft. He's so explosive, so fast. And that's one of the things that I think really jumps off the film. He started his career at Illinois for two seasons in 2015 and 2016. A total of 8 starts there for the Illini. Newcomer of the year in the Big 12 in 2015. 723 yards on the ground, 6 touchdowns, also had 16 receptions. Academic All Big Ten in 2016, had 2 games had a second game because he had 1 in 2015, but a second game over 100 yards in 2016 before deciding to transfer to Vanderbilt in 2017, sat out the 2017 season. In 2018, had the second most rushing yards in Vanderbilt history. I'll let you think about that just for one sec. Second most in Vanderbilt history in his first season there as a junior. Over 1,200 yards, 1,244 yards, 7.9 yards per carry, 12 touchdowns, also had 13 receptions as well. Had 6 rushes of 60-plus yards, which was first among SEC running backs. 5 100-yard games, including 182 yards against Mizzou, which was the most by a Vanderbilt running back against an SEC opponent. Had a 3-game stretch, 172 yards and 3 touchdowns against Arkansas, 182 yards and a touchdown against Mizzou, and 127 yards and a touchdown against Ole Miss. Then he went with 243 yards and 2 touchdowns against Baylor in a 45-38 loss in the Texas Bowl. 5 games with at least 2 receptions. So Keyshawn Vaughn, we were expecting a lot out of him coming into the 2019 season, really expecting him to take his game to the next level, much like J.K. Dobbins has. And we haven't quite seen that because Vanderbilt, let's be honest, they've struggled this year. Expecting Riley Neal to step in and really set the tone. Kyle Shermer being gone, Riley Neal showed some promise at Ball State, coming in to be the starter there for the Commodores. Hasn't really worked out. Jared Pinkney has kind of underperformed at the tight end position. Kalijah Lipscomb was a top receiver in the SEC a season ago, and he's not quite at that level this year. So the team struggled as a whole through 7 games. Still has 703 yards on the ground, 5.4 yards per carry, which is much lower than what he did a season ago at that 7.9 clip. Let's see, 6 touchdowns. He does have 21 receptions so far on the year. 59 receptions, 601 yards, and 3 touchdowns to go along with just under 3,000 yards rushing and 27 touchdowns in his career. 505 carries. So you're talking about about 560 touches so far in the career. So when you're talking about running backs and wear and tear, that's something that, through his first 3 seasons had, just 217 carries with the Illini. And then so far this year, this year, 131 carries, season ago, 157. So he's already surpassing the total that he had for the Illini. So I think having that extra year in between, that red shirt year, if you will, to transfer may actually help in terms of, that wear, as I was talking about with his legs. Total 100-yard games, had 10 100-yard games, 3 games with 4 receptions as well. In the win against Missouri this year, 29 carries for 96 yards. That was just 3.3 yards per carry. Had a touchdown, 4 receptions, 80 yards in its score. Vanderbilt, trying to resurrect their season. Big win there over Missouri. Now, Lamichal Perine out of Florida. This was a guy who was sharing the backfield with Jordan Scarlett. This year he's really the guy. 5'11", 216 pounds. And, with Lamichal, this year, let's see, through 8 games, just 99 carries, 461 yards, 4 touchdowns. Has 2,200 yards in his career, 20 touchdowns to go along with 54 receptions, 22 of which are, in this season against Auburn. Had 14 carries, 130 yards, and a touchdown. That was his only game over 100 yards. And look, here's the deal with Lamichal Perine. He has the explosiveness and the ability to go the distance, but with running behind that offensive line has really been kind of a struggle. This is a line that had to replace the likes of Jawan Taylor, Martez Ivey, and Fred Johnson. And so I think it's been slow going at times, but there's no questioning his ability to really fight for extra yards. He somehow finds yards when there's just nothing there, and next thing you know, he's falling forward for 3 and 4 yards. That's one of the things that I think is very admirable. And the thing too is when you get him out in space as a receiver, shows excellent hands. To me, I think Lamichal Perine is kind of underrated. You see the effort. He's really a guy who is always going to run hard and runs behind his pads, has that forward lean to him as well. He's someone that I think if a team gives him a chance, gives him a shot, he's used to sharing the backfield. I think Lamichal Perine might surprise some people. Now, Najee Harris out of Alabama, 6'2", 230 pounds. A season ago, had more yards than Josh Jacobs, who was drafted in the first round. 117 carries, 783 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Through 7 games for Bama, 556 yards and 3 touchdowns. Now, here's the deal with Najee Harris. There's no doubt that he's physical. There's no doubt that he can get north and south. He's a bit of a downhill runner, one cut and go type of a guy. You saw him, and we talked about him previously, and I talked about him possibly moving into that upper echelon of the running back position. But the more I watch him, the more I study him, is yes, he can make the catch out of the backfield. He does have 16 receptions this year. Had only 4 receptions in his career coming into 2019, but he just lacks that burst. And those bigger running backs, he's at 230 pounds. You look at Bo Scarborough, he was a guy who really struggled with this 40 time. His stock dropped tremendously. I worry about that for Najee Harris. I'd like to see him come back for one more year to really hone him, his skills, really improve upon that 40 time. And, that's something that I don't know, where he's going to be. It may be just, it is what it is with him. But he did show some decent hands, actually hurdle the guy. So there is some athleticism there to him, some twitchiness in the lower body. He just isn't always displaying that consistently. So that was, let's see. That was my top 11. Really, I think if you go to the website, I've got 2 guys tied at number 10 overall, and that's, Lamichal Perine and Najee Harris. I've got a few other backs. I've got 6 more that I wanted to talk about. Now, the first one is Kylan Hill, the junior for A&M. 5'11", 215 pounds. Let's see, over 1,700 yards in his career, 11 touchdowns in 7 games in 2019, 643 yards, 5 touchdowns, just 8 receptions in 2019, had 22 a season ago. Now in 2019 had 4 straight games over 100 yards. Now with that was against Louisiana Lafayette, Southern Miss, K-State, and Kentucky. in his last 3 games, going against more formidable defenses, against the likes of Auburn, Tennessee, and LSU, 92 total yards. So, I think everyone jumped on the hype train with Kylan Hill. Is it so much his offensive line? Is it the defense? That when he went up against some of the more dynamic defenses in the SEC, I think there's no question that this is a kid who has some speed to him, has decent power as well, excellent balance, decent hands coming out of the backfield. But I think what was most impressive for me was watching him pass block. And I mentioned that last week against LSU, Grant Delpit coming off the edge, and Delpit ultimately got around the corner on the left tackle, and Kylan Hill saw that. He was really on the right side of the line, turned his head, peeled back, and was able to kind of get a chip on the diving Grant Delpit to ensure that his quarterback, Garrett Schrader, didn't get hit by Delpit. And I thought it was really an athletic move. It was very, really good awareness as a pass protector. And that's something, to me, I think that shows something. Is Kylan Hill going to come out after this year? Probably not. I don't think he's had quite the season. The first 4 games, absolutely explosive. The last 3 games, not so much. So, what he's going to have to prove the rest of the season is that, those first 4 games were not a fluke. If he can get right the ship, there's a chance that he can end up being a top 10 back because of what he can do in the passing game. I just don't know right now. Jury's still out there. Now, A.J. Dillon. This guy looks like a beast when you see him. He wins the award for the guy that walks off the bus, and you check things off. This guy's an absolute football player. 6 foot, 250 pounds, out of Boston College. The junior really burst onto the scene in 2017. 300 carries that season, over 1,500 yards, 5.3 yards per carry, 14 touchdowns. In 2018, played in just 10 games. He was really battling a high ankle sprain. And we know what high ankle sprains can do to guys. Bryce Love, not only did it bother him, in 2017, but it did so in 2018 as well. Really kind of hampered, his running style. And with A.J. Dillon, despite the high ankle sprain, still over 1,100 yards and 10 touchdowns on the year, but it limited. I think it did limit his effectiveness. But in 2019, clean bill of health. He's been healthy, and he's back to that freshman form. 968 yards. He's second to only Chuba Hubbard in terms of yardage. 5.4 yards per carry, which is the most in his career to this point. 9 touchdowns. Already has 7 receptions. Why is that important? Well, he didn't have any his freshman year and just 8 a season ago. So he's somebody who I think, another guy who needs to show that he can catch the football out of the backfield. 705 carries so far for over 3,600 yards and 33 touchdowns. That's 705 carries. That's a lot of wear on a running back. Those wheels you have to start worrying about a little bit. But 17 games, over 100 yards. In the last 7 games, his freshman year, 1,236 yards on the ground and 12 touchdowns. 5 games this year, 5 touchdowns. I'm sorry, 5 games over 100 yards. And against NC State this last game, 34 carries, 223 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He's just continuing to get better and better as the season goes along, and he's a guy who's just going to wear down defenses. He's big, he's physical, he likes to get north and south. He's not somebody who's going to dance at all. And the thing with him is he runs people over, but you watch him and you're like, man, this guy, he's pulling away from people, and you're not expecting that from a guy who's 6 foot and 250 pounds. They say he runs a 4.5. He's one of those guys, I can't wait for the combine because I really want to see what this guy runs. If he runs a 4.5, you can expect teams are going to, really watch that draft stock shoot up exponentially. So A.J. Dillon, I hope he stays healthy. If he does, he'll be a guy to watch come the pre-draft process. Joshua Kelly, the transfer, I believe, from Sac State, 5'11", 219 pounds for UCLA. was a bright spot there for Chip Kelly's team a season ago. 2018, 1,243 yards on the ground, 12 touchdowns, 27 receptions out of the backfield as well. 6 games over 100 yards receiving. Against USC, 40 carries, 289 yards at 7.2 yards per carry, and 2 touchdowns in a win over the Trojans. In 2019, he's been battling some injuries, battling the ankle injury. But he's had over 100 yards in 2 of the last 3 games against Arizona and Stanford. Big win there against the Stanford Cardinal. 571 yards on the ground, 3 touchdowns, 8 receptions to his credit as well. Hopefully Joshua Kelly can stay healthy. I think he's somebody who can be effective at the next level. I like his running style. Another guy who runs with attitude, runs with purpose. And, he's someone who, if he can continue to stay healthy, I think he's getting better. I think he's finally gotten his legs underneath him, and I wouldn't be surprised if you see him put on a string now of 100-yard games. Now, Darius Anderson of TCU, 5'11" and 212 pounds. He's a guy, to me, he's had to share the backfield with a bevy of running backs, including Sewo Olanolua, who himself is a guy who could be a sleeper when it's all said and done. But he has 362 carries in his career, over just under 2,200 yards on the ground and 18 touchdowns. But 3 games over 100 yards this year, and he's somebody who I think he's showing an ability to hit the hole, some speed to run away from people. And he's showing off some versatility, catching the football out of the backfield as well. I think Darius Anderson, TCU, because they are spreading the love around in the backfield every time. I think Olanolua is kind of your hammer, whereas Darius Anderson is a guy who is going to potentially take a top off of a defense. And so I think Darius Anderson for me is a guy who teams may not be as high on, in terms of production, but a guy who I think, is going to be a better pro than he was a collegiate running back. Now, a guy who's kind of been bit with an injury bug, Rodney Smith out of Minnesota. Big reason why he and Shannon Brooks, another guy who's battled some injuries for the Golden Gophers, they're a big reason why PJ Fleck's team is undefeated. 5'11", 210 pounds. He's really a 6-year senior because he came there in 2014 redshirted. 2015 over 600 yards on the ground, 16 receptions. 2016 over 1,100 yards, 16 touchdowns to go along with 23 receptions. 2017, another big year, 977 yards on the ground, 3 touchdowns. A guy who's continuing to show he can catch the football out of the backfield. Then in 2018, slowed with the injury, just 2 games under his belt. But he's shown he can stay healthy this year. He's sharing the backfield, sharing the wealth. Just 137 carries so far this year, 786 yards, 5.7 yards per carry, which is the most in his career, and 6 touchdowns. So in his career, a lot of carries, 788 total, over 3,700 yards, 27 touchdowns, 63 receptions. He's a guy who just runs hard. He's physical. He runs hard between the tackles, runs behind his pads. He's very patient, allows his blockers to really get on their blocks before he cuts up the field, so he's not getting too far ahead of himself. He allows those plays to develop before he puts his foot in the ground and gets north and south. A guy who's shown a bit of a burst at the second level as well. I'm really happy for him that he's having the year that he's had. The medicals are going to have to check out, but he's a guy who I think could be a day 3 pick and end up sticking with the roster and be a surprise for teams. And then finally, Xavier Jones out of SMU, 5'11", 208 pounds. When you think of SMU, you think of the high-profile passing attack and Skip Dykes, what he's doing there. Sonny Dykes, really doing a tremendous job with the Mustangs. And Xavier Jones, when you look at his numbers, over 500 carries, 2,900 yards, 34 touchdowns, 63 receptions though for over 450 yards, 3 touchdowns as well. Has 11 games over 100 yards, and he had 1,000 yards in 2017. But since then, he hasn't eclipsed that total just yet. But through 7 games this year, he's definitely going to get there, barring injury. 751 yards on the ground, 12 touchdowns. He's a weapon and a guy who I think is going to probably be a day 3 pick, 4th, 5th round, 6th round, possibly even. But his ability to be versatile, teams are going to be looking for those guys. If you remember, I was talking about the Austin Ekelers and the Tarik Cohens, guys who can be that change of pace back. Nyheim Hines, and I think Xavier Jones can absolutely be that guy. So those are the running backs that I'm keeping an eye out for. I hope you will as well throughout the rest of the college football season. So that will allow us to transition to what I saw last week. So that's going to really take a look at the games that I was able to watch. And let's see. As I go through my notes, and if you haven't listened to my podcast, I'm old school. I like to write things down. That's really kind of how I remember things more than anything else. But Ohio State Northwestern 52-3 in that game. Chase Young once again showing absolute beast. The stutter off the ball versus the right tackle. Quick arm over to the inside, close in a hurry on the quarterback for a sack. Right tackle overset a bit, and he took advantage of that. So explosive with his get off, using his hands to slap the left tackle's hands away. He's so quick. Starts up the field, spin move back to the inside. Just a really dynamic edge rusher. Jeffrey Okudah, 6'1", 200 pounds, the junior, press man coverage. Really just leaving a tight window for the quarterbacks there. Aiden Smith. Really struggling to find an opening there against Jeffrey Okudah. After a while, he finally decided I'm not really throwing his way. But Joe Gaziano, the 6'4", 275-pounder who I've said, kind of reminds me of Dean Lowry of the Packers. He was showing a nice rip move to disengage, turning the corner, beating the right tackle, chasing down the quarterback all the way to the opposite side of the field, getting a tackle for no gain. He's kind of stiff hips turning the corner, stiff hipped, but works hard to get around the edge and get to the quarterback. He's a guy who I think he's 6'4", 275. I think he could be a 3-4 defensive end at the next level. Fresno State beating UNLV 56-21, 56-27. Michael Walker, the defensive end linebacker hybrid. 9 tackles, a tackle for loss, and a pass breakup in that game. He's a guy, he's 6'3", 230 pounds. He's going to be a 34 outside linebacker. Showed a really good job as a stand-up rusher, shooting through the A-gap to drop the running back for loss. Downhill on punt cover. Hit the punt returner right after he caught the ball. Really a big hit, kind of a momentum changer there. He's a guy who moved from right to left in the passing lane, reading the quarterback's eyes, got his hand up in the passing lane to knock a pass down. Houston against Connecticut. You wouldn't really think that would be a game to watch, but man, I got to watch Josh Jones and Matt Peart go up against each other. Now, Houston won the game 24-17, but I think Matt Peart really showed up a little bit better than Josh Jones. Now, look, Josh Jones is 6'7", 310 pounds. Very easy mover and pass protection. I think he's pretty light on his feet. Quick to get out of his stance. Showed the good agility as well, getting out on a screen pass in front of Kyle Porter. Got a kick out block on the cornerback. Definitely an easy knee bender. Good mirror skills against the defensive end. And tried to get an inside move. Use his hands first. To keep him at bay, and then the feet caught up with it. I thought, really good job keeping the edge rushers in front of him. Defensive back blitzing off the edge, was easily able to slide and pick him up as well. But look, Matt Peart, 6'7", 302 pounds, the kid out of Kingston, Jamaica. This kid is legit. Very light feet in pass protection, good leverage getting under the defensive end's pad level, just standing guys up. He stays really low and is a knee bender, short choppy steps, much like Jones, But the knee bend, for a guy who was 6'7", he plays with excellent leverage, gets underneath that pad level, able to really drive that guy up and out. And he just seemed so polished. I was expecting to see a guy who was really raw, but defensive end trying to get a rip underneath him, but he kept those hands inside, right in that chest plate. And so when they went to try to rip, there really wasn't anywhere to go because he locked on and he was not letting go. And that edge rusher trying to get underneath him, trying to turn the corner, and Matt Parrott was having nothing of it. Easily mirroring the defensive end, able to anchor, reset his feet and anchor even when he was driven back a little bit. Does a good job driving his man up the field and away from the pocket as well. He's a guy who's rising up draft boards. I think both of these guys are. And I think when you're looking at my left, my offensive tackle rankings, these are two guys. We'll be talking about the tackles in next week's podcast. These are two guys. Expect them to be rising up my draft board for sure. Matt Parrott, I hadn't seen him play yet, so I couldn't put him in my top 10. But he's absolutely going to be in my top 10 next week. Clemson taking on Louisville, 45-10 winners in that game. And, Trevor Lawrence, this is a guy, 20 of 29, 233 yards, 3 touchdowns with 2 interceptions. Really not having the year that you would expect, but I kind of feel like some of that is brought on by the media and the pressure. You saw that with Sam Darnold. Everyone was anointing him as the Heisman Trophy winner, the savior for USC, the guy who's going to take the Trojans to the promised land, and Darnold just didn't live up to that in his redshirt sophomore season. And we're seeing kind of that sophomore slump with Trevor Lawrence this year. But I think he's the guy who's going to end up turning it around and is still going to end up being the top pick in next year's draft. Now you look at Isaiah Simmons, the 6'4", 230-pound junior outside linebacker. Came there as a safety. He's really going to be that guy, that hybrid linebacker. 8 tackles, 2 sacks, also a pass breakup. Comes downhill in a hurry. Basically he was patient. Quarterback pulls it on his own read. Quick to plant, get back outside for a tackle for loss in the backfield. He played edge, played inside backer, outside linebacker, lined up over the slot in that game. Leads the team in tackles for loss, and sacks. In coverage, quarterback checked down to the tight end, burst inside out to get to the sideline and force the tight end out. Was spying the quarterback on the right side. Quarterback rolls to the left. Shot across the line, able to drop the quarterback behind the line for a sack. And just, he's a guy who takes great angles to the football. He's looking more and more like a bona fide top 10 pick. Now, the Wisconsin Badgers, could they be looking ahead to their game against Ohio State this week? Entirely possible. They lost 24-23 to the Fighting Illini of Illinois in Champaign. Jonathan Taylor still, over 100 yards rushing, 28 carries, 132 yards, and a touchdown in that game. But Jack Cohn, 264 yards, a touchdown and an interception. The defense really kind of struggled. I thought Zach Vaughn struggled getting to the quarterback a little bit. And really it was Illinois down the stretch making some plays. Jonathan Taylor had an unfortunate fumble at really a time where you really didn't need to have it happen. Reggie Corbin was a running back, 5'10", 200 pounds, the senior, really kind of a slasher, accelerating away from guys after he hits the hole. But the slashing running style, his ability to make those cuts down the field, it kind of makes him an intriguing possible late day 3 pick. I mentioned Zach Vaughn. He is explosive off the ball, beating the left tackle out of his stance. Really 3 steps and he's already into the backfield. So I thought that was impressive. Backside pressure against the run, chasing down the running back. So he was a guy who just had a knack for knifing in, shooting gaps, and was disruptive. But there were times where he wasn't getting home, and I think that was really a problem for them because there are a lot of young guys on this team. They had to replace a lot of starters, and if Zach Vaughn, Chris Orr aren't making plays, then Wisconsin's really going to struggle at times. Especially that defense really took a hit when Scott Nelson, the safety, went down to injury. Illinois' got some guys to keep an eye out for on defense. Delay Harding, 6'1", 230 pounds, run off to the right, able to shoot the gap and drop Taylor to the inside. He's very active, 11.5 tackles per game, leads the Big Ten, takes good angles to the football as well. Read a screenplay, beat the center, Tyler Biadasz, to the inside and dropped Garrett Groshek for no gain in the open field. And then number 55, Jamal Milan. He's 6'3", 300 pounds, a big physical guy. Can shoot gaps a little bit. He's definitely a guy who's going to be takes on multiple blockers, but can shed blocks, fill holes, make it difficult for the running back. He's somebody who I think can play on Sundays as well. Now, Oklahoma taking on West Virginia, 52-14 game there. Jalen Hurts doing Jalen Hurts things, 16-17. The only drop was misfire was a drop actually to Drake Stoops, the son of legendary OU head coach Bob Stoops. But still, 16-17, 316 yards, 3 touchdowns to go along with 10 carries for 75 yards and another 2 scores. Hurts just putting on another impressive performance, and a guy who I think is going to make a push and probably will be in New York for the Heisman ceremony. CeeDee Lamb showing that he was able to separate from the cornerback, on a regular basis. 25-yard reception, able to get open late across the middle, using that big body to his advantage. Neville Gallimore, this was a guy. There were times where he was so explosive and other times where he would just disappear during the game. And that's really the biggest concern that I have for Neville Gallimore at the next level. Kenneth Murray, the 6'2", 234-pound junior linebacker, spying the quarterback in coverage. Quarterback ends up rolling out. He decides he's going to go ahead and come downhill. So explosive with the speed. I mean, he looks like a guy. When he shows up at the combine, he's going to definitely look the part. So fast. The closing speed I have here, plus closing speed. It really should be plus closing speed for a guy his size. It's incredible. 3rd and 10. There's a run play, shot in off the edge to drop the running back for no gain. He's very active to the against the run, really flying to the football. I think the biggest thing for me with him, because I think he can drop into coverage, he can blitz the quarterback, really do a lot off the edge and in the perimeter, but it's his gap integrity. I think that was one of the things that he's struggled with as a freshman and a sophomore, and with everything that Alex Grinch has done for this defense. That's the one thing that I'm still waiting to see from Kenneth Murray, and hopefully he can continue to develop that. Now, Oregon took on Washington, 35-31 winners were the Ducks to keep their playoff hopes alive. And, Justin Herbert, was a guy who showed that he can take what the defense gives him, surveying the field, taking the checkdowns when he needed to, effortless throws on the run, some ill-advised throws down the field, and so he's kind of a streaky quarterback. He was 6 for 6 for 55 yards and a touchdown. Then he goes 0 for 5, on his latest stretch. I thought when he got under pressure, there were times where he wouldn't set his feet and the ball was sailing on him. But when he's allowed to sit in the pocket and deliver a strike, he's one of the more impressive quarterbacks that we've seen in the last few years, because it's so effortless, that delivery and his ability to gun the football in there. I think he can kind of take things off and be able to change the speeds, which is what you really need to do. You're going to have to put the touch to a receiver, especially if he's going to. In front of a safety and behind the linebacker and things like that, dropping the ball in the bucket. I think Jacob Eason, though, the 6'6", 227-pound junior, he really only knows one speed. I didn't really see a ton of touch. He's the guy who just wants to gun it in there. There were times where the ball got on the receivers a lot faster than they were expecting. Hunter Bryant had one where really he couldn't get the hands up in time on an out route. And that's something that I think Jacob Eason's going to need to continue to work on. If you haven't seen Penei Sewell, the sophomore, 6'6", 325, he's an absolute treat. He's going to be the top tackle prospect for the 2021 draft. I think Walker Little is going to be number 2, and then it'll be everybody else after that. But Penei Sewell, he's so gifted with his feet. He looks like a tight end with the way that he moves, but he has tackle size. Absolutely caved in the left side of the line in the running game. So athletic and agile as a pass blocker, just makes it look easy. Sits down and just dominates his man that he has in front of him. Did get his first penalty that he's ever been called. Had a holding call against him, first in his entire career. But the effectiveness for him, he's one of those guys that just continues to get better and better each and every game, which is scary. Shane Lemieux, the guard, 6'4", 316 pounds. He struggles against some of the speed. Still agile enough to get out and pull in front of CJ Verdell, getting out, sustaining his block on the edge. 45th straight start, excellent. Veteran presence there on the line. If he doesn't have to deal with too much speed, he's very effective. It's just the speed is what can bother him. Jake Hansen, the center, 6'5", 295, 43rd start in 45 games. Another guy who's really agile, climbing to the second level. Sprung Cyrus Habibi Likio on an inside run for a 14-yard touchdown. Steal the nose tackle to the outside to let him go ahead and run off that block. Can slide with his man in pass protection. Buried a defensive tackle. Really put him on his butt, opening the hole for Travis Dye on a 22-yard run. He and Nick Harris out of Washington, the 6'1", 302-pounder, definitely top 5 guard or top 5 centers in my opinion. Nick Harris, though, I think really kind of moved himself above Jake Hansen. Plays with excellent leverage. I thought he did a really good job. Starting first. It was quick at the line to kind of slow the rush, and then climb to the second level to the defensive back. To spring Hunter Bryant on a tight end screen. He's very quick, very agile. I thought one of the things that was impressive was, combo block with the right tackle on the nose tackle, Jordan Scott. Then he was able to kind of do a drop step and pick up Troy Dye trying to shoot off the edge. And I thought that was really impressive, his ability to pick that up. LSU, Mississippi State, we talked about what Kylan Hill did in the game. Look, Grant Delpit, this is a guy who plays all over the field. He can play at depth, 15 yards, and come down in the running game, able to shoot holes between the tackles, make plays on the perimeter, blowing up screens, can rush the passer. Grant Delpit can do it all. And, this is a guy... Let's see, Delpit, 11 tackles and a quarterback hurry. Yeah, Grant Delpit's going to be a top 10, possibly top 5 pick. 6'3", 203 safety. If you haven't gotten a chance to watch LSU yet, tune in, watch Delpit play. Number 7, he's all over the field. Joe Burrow, 25 pass touchdowns, 79.6 yards. 79.6 completion percentage. Leads the FBS. Pocket collapsing around him, just steps up to avoid the rush. Easy delivery. He has complete command of the offense, knows exactly where he's going to go with the football, the anticipation to hit his receivers in stride, his ability to hit the crossing routes, put the ball where the receivers can make a catch and get down the football field. I thought Justin Jefferson had another nice game, the 6'3", 192-pound junior. Jefferson on the day, 8 receptions, 89 yards and a touchdown. Willing to go over the middle, uses his big body, stop route. Then able to break the defensive back's tackle, get up the field after that. Then Clavin Chasen, 6'4", 250-pound junior. I really got to see the speed to power getting under the left tackle. Wasn't really expecting him to be able to do that, but drove the left tackle back into the quarterback's lap. So fast turning the corner too. I mean, just burning by guys. The ankle flexion I thought was one of the things, really bending as he's turning the corner. I thought was really impressive as well. Covering Highland Hill on a wheel route, ultimately able to elevate and make a play on the football. Clavin Chasen, I think he's definitely solidified himself as one of the top pass rushers in the draft. And then Christian Fulton, he does an excellent job, driving on the football, getting a hand in and knock it away. Trailed let's see. He was beaten by Osiris Mitchell on a post, but the recovery speed, he didn't panic, closed in a hurry, and really was able to play the hands of the receiver, kept an eye on the receiver's eyes, didn't really turn around to locate the ball, but played the hands, and ultimately made a play on the football. I thought it was really special play, from him. He was covering the outside in the zone coverage, read the quarterback's eyes, came back to the inside and picked off a pass, thrown to the inside slot receiver. So really jammed the outside receiver in that zone, went back inside and made a pick. I thought Gary Danielson broke that game down. I think it was Gary Danielson. I can't remember who it was on the broadcast. I think LSU. I think they're playing on CBS. But they did an excellent job breaking that down, and you could really see that. You saw him jam the receiver on the outside, came back off on the inside, read the quarterback's eyes, and made the pick. Really fooled the freshman Garrett Schrader. Let's see. Baylor got the win over Oklahoma State, 45-27. Charlie Brewer is a kid who just continues to develop, continues to look better and better. Georgia, Kentucky, playing in the deluge in Athens, Georgia, Sanford Stadium. Really struggled with throwing the football. Both teams did. Lynn Bowden Jr., receiver. He'll be a receiver at the next level, but he's playing quarterback for the Wildcats. Due to injury and ineffectiveness at the quarterback position, he's the guy right now. Not the most impressive passer by any means, but he's just so athletic, so dynamic. He's the guy who can make his way into the top 10 of the receiver rankings. But DeAndre Swift, 23 carries, 179 yards, 2 touchdowns. While other guys were having issues in the rain, he had 0 issues. He looked dynamic as always. Colorado going down to Washington State 41-10. Steven Montez really struggling. He was 16-30, 129 yards, 2 interceptions. Didn't throw a touchdown in that game. Just a guy who just isn't seeing the field. He's missing, not only is he's not setting his feet, he's not driving through the football, driving the ball down the field. Made a couple of nice throws, dropped the ball in to KD Nixon, putting it over his shoulder on a flea flicker. But it's one of those things, he had an out route to the wide side of the field, at the 7-yard line, and underthrew his receiver, who was wide open on this out route. It's just the footwork is off. I think he's it looks like he's lost his confidence is really what it looks like. And Steven Montez is really going to have to work on that, really have to kind of right the ship going forward. Otherwise, that's really going to impact his draft stock overall. And then, Penn State, as I mentioned, KJ Hamler, so sudden off the ball, sudden with the ball in his hands as well. I talked about that inside slot. The fade, his ability to track the football over his shoulder. Had a 53-yard touchdown from the slot. Ran by Josh Metellus up the seam. Really turned the safety around. Kind of cut to the inside. Kind of looked almost like a skinny post. Tracked the ball over his shoulder well. Catch for a touchdown. He's a guy who can play in the slot. I think that's really where his home's going to be, is as a slot receiver. And he was really wreaking havoc for a lot of those, the safeties having to try to match up with him. I thought they really struggled there. And then USC beating Arizona 41-14. They're down to their 4th-string running back. I think they're down, like 7 or 8 of their starters on defense. Michael Pittman, just 4 receptions for 69 yards. But look, Tyler Vaughn's and Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think, had better. Tyler Vaughn, 7 receptions for 75 yards and a touchdown. But Michael Pittman just looks like a beast. I mean, he's so strong with the ball in his hands. Quick throw on the perimeter on an 8-yard touchdown. Got up the field, ran through the cornerback for the touchdown. High points to pass down the middle of the field. Tracked the ball well. Able to jump and elevate over the defensive back. On a 54-yard gain as well. Just so big, so physical, able to attack the football in the air. He doesn't really need a whole lot of separation because he can kind of create some separation late And he's a guy who really you struggle to kind of jam him off the line. He's going to go up like a power forward and attack the football in the air. Kind of reminds me of J.J. Arcega-Whiteside with the way that he attacks the football. But USC has to find ways to get him the football down the football field because he is so dynamic. So those were the games that I saw, what I really got to watch. So let's take a look at some matchups real quick, and then we'll go ahead and get this podcast wrapped up. So we mentioned Wisconsin and Ohio State. That's the early game. Number 3 Buckeyes hosting the number 13 Badgers, who are coming off the loss to Illinois. Will they be motivated? Paul Chryst going to have his work cut out for him going up against Ryan Day's, the dynamic offense led by Justin Fields and J.K. Dobbins, and then Chase Young and Jeffrey Okudah on defense. OU taking on Kansas State in Manhattan. Jalen Hurts getting to go up against a tough K-State defense. Iowa taking on Northwestern. Northwestern has struggled. I don't know that they'll be able to put up much of a fight against Iowa. Let's see. A&M against Mississippi State. I think that'll be an interesting contest. Garrett Schrader going up against Kellen Mond in that one. Really want to see what if Kylan Hill can really get things going. He struggled, like I said, in the last 3 games. Can he get things going against that Aggie defense led by Justin Matabuke and Buddy Johnson, the linebacker? So continuing to go through this, Liberty's taking on Rutgers. Liberty, I think, is a favorite in that game, and it's on the Big 12 Network. Kind of want to tune into that game, watch Stephen Buckshot Calvert throwing the football to Antonio Gandy-Golden, who's going to be a breakout receiver in the NFL. Just watch. Auburn, LSU, the other big game. LSU, the number 2 ranked Tigers, at home taking on the number 9 Tigers of Auburn. And I want to see that defensive front, that defensive line. Can they get to Joe Burrow? Can Derek Brown really be effective there? And then LSU's defense, I think they're going to pressure Bo Nix left and right. And I think LSU is going to end up coming away with the win there. Penn State going on the road, number 6 ranked Nittany Lions going to East Lansing to take on Michigan State. Texas, number 15 in the country, heading to Fort Worth, Amon G. Carter Stadium against TCU. That ought to be an interesting game. Minnesota, number 17 ranked Golden Gophers at home against Maryland. And then check this out. Minnesota and Iowa State both ranked. Number 23 ranked Cyclones. I mean, you got PJ Fleck and Matt Campbell, 2 of the best young coaches in the game. You really see what they're doing there. Iowa State taking on Oklahoma State. I think that'll be a really good game to watch. Iowa State is really putting everything together, both offensively and defensively. And I think they're a well-rounded team. Oklahoma State with that high-powered offense should be an interesting contest. As we continue to scroll through things, let's see. Bama takes on Arkansas without Tua Tagovailoa. I guess if they're going to lose him, this is probably the right time. Against the Hogs, they're saying he'll be back next week. Clemson taking on BC, number 4 ranked, Clemson Tigers at home. The only thing that I could see here, that might trip them up at all is that BC running game. BC hasn't had the best year. I think defensively they're going to struggle, but it'll be interesting to see if BC, what they can do with that run game. Notre Dame, number 8th ranked, Fighting Irish, taking on number 19 Michigan in the Big House, going to Ann Arbor. Can Shea Patterson really put together a full game? And we didn't talk about his play last week, but a guy who he looked scared against Penn State. He was real skittish in the pocket, really couldn't set his feet. Yetur Gross-Matos, was spending some time in the backfield. Shaka Toney, their defensive end, showing that he can play both the run and the pass. And then Robert Windsor on the inside. That defensive line is just so impressive. They've got guys who can play at the next level. Robert Windsor, the speed to power, the quickness off the ball, generating that power, able to shoot gaps as well. He can be very very effective. And then their sophomore phenom linebacker, Micah Parsons, the instincts, his ability to play the run, drop into passing lanes, and get after the passer as a blitzer. I think they really exposed Michigan State there. Michigan there. So I think Notre Dame, ends up getting it done. Although, USC in the second half figured something out against the Irish and only made it a 3-point game. So if Michigan can figure out what they can do, the defense is dynamic. Kwity Paye is for real at the defensive end position. Not somebody, a guy that a lot of people are talking about, 6'4", 277-pound junior. He was the leading tackler, had 10 tackles on the day. If that defense can get some stops to get that Notre Dame defense, can Shea Patterson really put things together? Can that old line, the much maligned offensive line for the Michigan Wolverines, who was once thought to be the strength, they've got 4 returning starters. It'll be interesting to see what can happen there. UCLA, much improved over the last couple of weeks under Chip Kelly, at home at the Rose Bowl, taking on the number 24 ranked Arizona State Sun Devils. Lost, basically a blowout to Utah. Didn't really get a whole lot going. The weather obviously played a big part there in Utah. Let's see, Utah taking on a Cal defense, that's really formidable. That's going to be an interesting contest as well. And then the late game, Oregon, the number 11th ranked Ducks, taking on Wazoo at home. So that's going to be the Week 9 lineup. So I'll be making sure to tune into those games, watch as many as I can so that I can go ahead and break things down. Next week, we're going to take a look at the offensive line, really break down the offensive tackles along with the interior linemen. We're also going to throw those tight ends in there as well. We got to give them some love. So we'll be talking about that next week, episode 12. Stay tuned. Hope everyone enjoys their weekend. Enjoy college football. Before you know it, it's going to be over. So you got to enjoy it. Really enjoy it while you can. I know I will be. So we'll be here again. We'll do it all over again next week. So until then, I am Gregg Schutze for ReadyForTheDraft.com. This has been the Ready for the Draft podcast. Take care, everyone, and I am out of here.